talk with banjo player Blake Williams. He's played with Bill Monroe, Lester Flatt, and even played on WSM, the Grand Ole Opry. Listen on to see what I had to ask. I'm Lillian, and I'm here at IBMA with Mr. Blake Williams. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Lillian. Thanks for having me.
So you played with Bill Monroe for a while. What's something people don't know about Bill Monroe?
Well, most people know that Bill Monroe was a very creative person. In fact, he almost wrote a mandolin tune every day. They also know that he was a hard-working guy and that he covered decades. But what a lot of people don't know, that he was a man of very strong willpower. When he was 16 years old in Kentucky, he used to cut down telephone poles and load them on a wagon and haul them by himself. He was strong physically, always was, and he believed that willpower and sheer determination would get him through anything, and it served him well for many decades. He loved to travel. He never complained about travel. When I went to work with him in 1981, he was 70, and we were working 100 shows a year, working the Grand Ole Opry. And what was special about Bill Monroe and playing for him was I got to play places with him that most bluegrassers would never get to play. For example, Carnegie Hall, the Kennedy Center. We played on the Grand Ole Opry. We played for presidents. I mean, it was just a very special thing.
I guess I should ask the more obvious question now. What was it like playing with him?
Well, he was a very tough taskmaster. He demanded that you play the melody. It was a fiddle-driven band. Flatt and Scruggs, of course, played with the banjo being the lead instrument, the driving force, and most bands are, but Bill Monroe loved fiddle music. He loved to write fiddle tunes, and so a lot of our songs were kicked off by the fiddle, and if you were a banjo picker, you had to just get in there and sort of sneak one of those fiddle tunes out as an instrumental. But it was fun, and once you understood how he wanted you to play, he was easy to get along with.
I was wondering, how did you get involved in bluegrass music?
When I was 12 years old, my daddy traded for a 5-string banjo, and he had a little general store in Sparta, Tennessee. And I ran my hand across that Gibson Mastertone one day, and it just spoke to me. Now, bear in mind, I was raised in the Sparta, Tennessee, which is the hometown of Lester Flatt, Benny Martin. I was 85 miles from Nashville, so I could listen to the Grand Ole Opry. I could listen to those country music shows from Nashville. And so I had a sort of a base of a love for the music. So I grabbed that banjo and I told my dad, I said, I'm going to learn to play this. And he said, you can have that banjo for your 13th birthday if you'll show me that you're determined to play it. 8 weeks later, I went on the local radio station and played Foggy Mountain Breakdown and never looked back.
That's a great story. So you mentioned Lester Flatt, and I know you got to play with him in Nashville Grass. What was that like?
This was very special. Lester was a great showman, and of course I was a big fan, and I was actually his last banjo picker. Kenny Ingram had went back to work with Jimmy Martin in 1978, and I got the call to go out and work with Lester. We traveled for about a year. He passed away in 1979. He was a real easygoing fella, and of course he wrote a lot of the classic bluegrass songs that we all know and love. And so my time with him was short-lived, but it was very special. And Lester, he always had a funny turn about him. There was a story one time about a man that was in a band that went on right before Lester. And he reared back and he sang one of Lester's songs. And he walked off and he said, Lester, did you hear me singing your song? And he said, yep. He said, I'll tell you, you was standing too close to the mic. And the fella said, really? He said, how far away should I get? And Lester said, do you have a car? So he wasn't too happy about the guy singing the song before he went on stage. But he had a real dry sense of humor, and he was a lot of fun.
I bet he was. So you've had a really impressive career. What do you think the highlight for you has been?
Oh my gosh, it would. You know, when I think back over the things I've got to do, from being on the Grand Ole Opry for over 21 years and walk the halls with the legends like Roy Acuff and the Osborne brothers and Bill Monroe and Jim and Jesse, and it's just, I have been so blessed to have been in this particular moment in time where I got to be around and get to know Hall of Famers. Always playing the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee. That's my favorite venue. In fact, we named our new little kitten Ryman after the Ryman Auditorium. But also this music led me to the love of my life, Kimberly, who we work together on her East Public Relations company that's doing very well. I'm very proud of her, and we're more on the business side than we are on the picking side, but meeting her would have to be one of the special highlights of my life.
I bet it was. You mentioned you were in the Grand Ole Opry for a while. What was that like?
Well, you know, the Opry, they call it the mother church of country music, and it's where Hank Williams stood on stage. It's where all these greats performed, and so there's a feeling about that auditorium that just overtakes you when you play it. I was so nervous the first time I played it, but to be on WSM radio, to be on the longest running radio show in history, it's indescribable. I tell people playing the Grand Ole Opry is almost like trying to describe what it feels like to be in love, because it's such a special place.
I bet so. So if you could go back in time and give a younger you advice, what would you say?
A younger me advice? Wow, that's a great question, Lily. Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to divide it into two parts. When I was a young man, Lester Flatt, Bill Monroe, the Osborne brothers, and people like that were on major recording labels in Nashville, Tennessee. Bluegrass music was also played right alongside top 40 country records. So you might have George Jones, you might have Bill Monroe played on the same radio station. As you well know today, bluegrass has sort of become more defined as its own music, and it's not as on commercial radio and TV as it was when I started. So my advice to people today is to learn your craft, practice, get the best instruments you can afford, but also consider getting an education, getting a skill or a craft to go along with that music, because more and more musicians today are having to find multiple income streams. So I started in 1969 as a very, very young boy. Things were different back then, but nowadays you need to learn all you can education-wise, technology-wise, and get that skill and craft. But keep playing music, because there are exceptionally talented people out here, and when you're one of those, you will rise to the top.
So my podcast is called I Had to Ask, and I was wondering what question you wish people had to ask you in interviews.
You may be the best interview I've ever had. What question do I wish people would ask? Wow. Well, I think that a lot of people concentrate so hard on learning to play music, and they're driven by that passion. But I think before that passion comes along, you really need to consider where your talent comes from, how you should act as a musician, and how you should represent yourself from being dependable to have integrity. And I think it goes back to the fact that you need to know God. So if I was to say, I want somebody to ask me, it would say, have a relationship with our Father in heaven and let Him lead you and guide you. And that will not only last you in this world, but the next.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell my listeners?
I just want to thank you for being such a special young lady and being so smart, and for promoting our music. And I predict that you will do well in life, Miss Lillian.
Thanks for